2 summers ago, I pulled just over 140 pounds of storage onions out of a single 4x8 raised bed. That same bed the year before, using the standard row spacing every seed packet recommends, gave me about 70 pounds. Same soil, same variety, same gardener. The only thing that changed was a planting pattern I picked up from an Amish neighbor named Amish over in Lancaster County. For 30 years, I followed the instructions on the back of the onion sets. Single rows, 4 inches apart, 12 to 15 inches between rows, nice and tidy. And every season I'd look at my harvest and wonder why so much good dirt was sitting empty between those rows doing nothing. Amos looked at my garden once, smiled the way those old farmers smile when they're being polite, and said, "You're leaving half your onions in the seed bag." Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how the Amish plant onions to double their yield without adding a single square foot of garden space. And stay with me to the end, because I'll share a small trick Amos showed me for protecting onions from root maggot flies that I've never seen written down in any gardening book. I'll be honest with you, when I first heard about this method, I was skeptical. I've been growing onions since I was in my late 20s. I'd read the university extension bulletins. I knew what the experts said about air circulation and root competition. And I figured if crowding onions actually worked, somebody would have told me about it by now. What I realized, after a couple of seasons watching Amos and a few other families work their kitchen gardens, is that the extension bulletins were written for commercial farms with tractors and machine cultivation. The Amish are growing food on a quarter acre to feed families of 10 and 12 people. They don't have the luxury of wasting ground. They figured out what plants actually need versus what the books say they need, and the difference is real. In Amish communities, especially around Lancaster County, there's a guiding concept called Gelassenheit. It's a German word, and it roughly translates to yielding, or working within the natural order rather than forcing your will on it. It sounds philosophical, but in the garden it plays out in the most practical way you can imagine. When you have 8 children to feed and 3/4 of an acre to work with, you can't afford to plant the way a seed catalog tells you to. You have to observe what the plant actually does, where its roots actually go, how much space its leaves actually use, and then you plant to match reality. Not tradition, not convenience, but reality. That's what changed my onion patch, and that's what this whole method is built on. Here's what you need to understand before we start planting. Onion roots run deep, but they don't spread out very wide. A mature onion plant pulls most of its nutrients from a column of soil about 3 inches in diameter, directly below the bulb. The wide spacing on seed packets isn't about root competition. It's about letting a tractor cultivator pass between the rows without damaging the plants. If you're working with hand tools or no tools at all, that space is wasted. The Amish figured this out generations ago. Now let me show you exactly how to set this up. Start with your bed preparation because onions will not tolerate shortcuts in the soil. In early spring, as soon as the ground is workable, spread 3 inches of well-aged compost across the bed and work it into the top 6 to 8 inches. If you can get aged horse or cow manure mixed into that compost, even better. The Amish have been composting with animal bedding for 300 years, and onions respond to it better than almost any other crop. You want soil that crumbles in your hand and smells sweet, not sour. Test your soil pH if you haven't lately. Onions want a pH between 6.2 and 6.8. Below 6, they struggle. If your soil is acidic, work in a cup of wood ash per square yard about 2 weeks before planting. This is what Amos does, and it doubles as a light potassium feed, which is exactly what developing bulbs need. Now let's talk about varieties, because this is where a lot of gardeners waste a whole season without realizing it. If you live north of about the 37th parallel, which is most of the country above a line running from San Francisco through southern Colorado to Virginia Beach, you need long day onions. Varieties like Copra, Patterson, Yellow Sweet Spanish, and Red Weathersfield. South of that line, you need short day onions like Texas Grano or Grenex. Plant the wrong type for your latitude, and you'll get golf balls instead of softballs no matter what else you do right. For the intensive method I'm about to show you, the Amish strongly prefer varieties that hold their shape under close spacing. Copra is the gold standard if you want storage onions. Patterson is a good second. Avoid the really giant varieties like Ailsa Craig for this method because they simply won't size up when packed tightly. Now here's where the yield multiplication really happens. Instead of single rows, you're going to plant what Amish calls the offset double row. You make 2 parallel furrows only 3 inches apart, running the length of your bed. Within each furrow, you space your onion sets or transplants 3 inches apart. But here's the key. The onions in the second row are offset by 1.5 inches, so they sit diagonally from the onions in the first row, not directly beside them. What this does is give every single onion a triangle of space around it instead of a square. That triangle uses the ground more efficiently, and because the root columns interlock diagonally without actually overlapping, each bulb still gets the 3-inch column of soil it needs. Between each double row, leave 8 inches of walking space, not 12 to 15. That's the other piece of wasted ground most gardeners don't question. 8 inches is all you need to get your hand in there for weeding and harvesting. In a standard 4x8 raised bed, this pattern fits 4 double rows, which means roughly 250 onions in a space where conventional planting would give you 120. Plant your sets or transplants so the top of the bulb sits just barely at soil level. Amish uses his thumb knuckle as a guide. Push into the first knuckle, drop the set, firm the soil around it. You're not burying them deep. Onions that are planted too deep develop long necks and store poorly. Now, before we keep going, if you're finding this useful and you want more of these deep dives into how traditional farming cultures actually grow food, hit the subscribe button. I've got a lot more of these coming from the Amish, from Depression-era gardeners, from Japanese intensive methods, and a few others I've been testing in my own beds. All right, let's get back to it. Once your onions are in the ground, the next piece is water management, and intensive planting changes the rules. A conventional onion bed can get away with a deep soaking once a week. A double-row intensive bed needs 1 inch of water applied 2 times a week for the first 6 weeks, then tapering back to once a week as the bulbs begin to form. The denser planting pulls moisture out of the soil faster. Miss a watering in week 3 and you'll stunt every plant in the bed. Drip irrigation is ideal here. Amish uses a soaker hose laid right down the center of each double row so the water reaches both sides evenly. If you're hand watering, water at the base, never on the leaves, and water early in the morning. Feeding matters too. With this many onions pulling from the same square footage, you need to side dress every 3 weeks through the growing season until the bulbs begin to swell. The Amish use composted chicken manure mixed with a little wood ash, scattered lightly down. The walking strip between double rows and scratched into the top inch of soil. If you don't have access to that, blood meal at a rate of 1 tablespoon per square foot works nearly as well. Stop all feeding once you see the bulbs starting to push up and widen, which happens about 6 weeks before harvest. Feeding past that point produces thick necks and short storage life. Here's the part most gardeners miss. With intensive planting, you harvest in waves, not all at once. Starting about 40 days after planting, pull every 3rd onion as green onions for the kitchen. This thins the bed just enough to let the remaining onions size up into full bulbs, while still giving you nearly double the yield of a single-row bed. Those early pulls are some of the best eating you'll ever get, and they stretch your onion harvest across the whole season instead of cramming it into 1 week in August. Now let me share a few patterns I used to fall into and what the Amish taught me about each one. The first pattern is trusting the seed packet spacing without question. I did this for 20 years. Those numbers are written for commercial growers with machinery. If you're gardening by hand, you can plant tighter, almost always. The second pattern is watering deeply and infrequently. That's good advice for tomatoes and squash. It's bad advice for densely planted onions with shallow, narrow root systems. Water often, water evenly, and stop before harvest. The third pattern is harvesting all at once. The conventional approach waits until every top falls over and pulls the entire bed in a weekend. The Amish thin early, pull green onions all season, and only bring in the mature bulbs at the end. It's more food spread across more months. The fourth pattern is ignoring variety selection for your latitude. I grew long day onions in Texas one year when I was helping a cousin, and we got nothing but marbles. Match your variety to your daylight length or none of this works. Now here's the trick I promised you at the start. This is something Amish showed me one afternoon that I've never seen in any gardening book. After transplanting your onion sets, he takes a small handful of wet clay soil, mixed with a pinch of wood ash, and presses a thin collar of that mud around the base of each plant. The collar is maybe half an inch thick and rises about an inch up the stem. It looks like nothing. It takes about 20 seconds per onion. What it does is block the onion maggot fly from laying eggs at the base of the plant. The onion maggot is the single most destructive pest in this crop. The flies are attracted to the scent of freshly disturbed onion tissue, and they lay eggs right where the stem meets the soil. The mud and ash collar masks that scent and creates a physical barrier. By the time the collar crumbles away 2 or 3 weeks later, the onions are past their most vulnerable window. The first year I tried this, I compared 2 beds side by side. The uncollared bed lost about 15% of its onions to maggot damage. The collared bed lost 2 plants out of 250. That's the kind of quiet, practical wisdom the Amish have been refining for 300 years. So that's the method. Build rich soil, choose the right variety for your latitude, plant in offset double rows 3 inches apart with 8-inch walking strips between them, water evenly. Feed every 3 weeks, harvest in waves starting with the green pulls, and use a mud and ash collar to keep the maggot flies off. If this changed how you think about growing onions, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what variety you grow, what zone you're in, and how your harvest comes in this year. And if you want more of these traditional methods broken down step by step, subscribe and stick around. Thanks for spending a little time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.